Hey everyone, this is Finn, and in this video we're going to continue setting up our character in our 2D platformer. I'm going to show you how to set up the transitions from the idle animation to the run animation so that we are actually running when our character is running. Go ahead and pull up your animator. If you don't have it, click the Window tab, go down to Animation, and click Animator. Your entry animation will be the first one that you created, so it should be the idle animation. We're going to keep it this way. Your run animation is going to be here as well. What we want to do is we want to create two transitions. One is going from idle to the run animation, and the second is going from the run animation to the idle animation. Of course, we want our run animation to be triggered whenever we are moving, and our idle whenever we are not. Let's right-click on our idle animation and select Make Transition, and then left-click onto the run animation to attach that. Then I want to right-click on the run animation and select Make Transition, and left-click to attach it to the idle animation. Now we want to create a parameter that controls whether or not we are playing the run animation. In this case, we are going to click on this plus button. Make sure that you are on the Parameters tab and not the Layers tab. Click this plus button and it'll bring up this drop-down menu. I want you to select Bool. And I'm going to name this new bool Moving. As another reminder, a bool returns a value of true or false, so this is a little checkbox here. When it's checked, it's true. When it's not checked, it's false. This is the parameter we're going to use to control our animations. Let's click on the transition that's going from idle to run on the left side here. We want to first deselect Has Exit Time. We want to make sure this box here is unchecked. Then we want to go down to the conditions list. Right now it says list is empty. We want to go down to the plus button and click to add to list. And the default is moving equals true. That's the condition we need to go to the run animation. And that'll do because we do want to transition to that run animation when our moving bool is true. The only reason why it started with that is because our first parameter is moving and the default is to have it have the condition be that the bool equals true. So it's going to do the same thing if we click here, left click on this transition going from the run animation to the idle animation. Uncheck this box next to Has Exit Time. This makes it so that it doesn't have to play an entire cycle of the animation before it'll transition to another animation. We don't want there to be any lag or delay on us going from our run animation to our idle animation or vice versa. These errors, or excuse me, these warnings that were in the console that I just cleared were just telling me, hey, a transition needs at least one condition or an exit time to be valid, and we just deselect Has Exit Time. That'll go away as soon as we add a condition, which we will do now by pressing the plus button again. And again, we see moving is true, but in this case, we want us to switch from the running animation to the idle animation whenever the moving bool equals false. So let's click that drop-down menu and select false. Now that we've set up our animator by creating a parameter and transitions for our animations, let's go back to our player controller script. And I am going to add a private animator called anim. This is the variable we're going to use to reference our animator component. let's go down to the start method, and we are going to store the value for that component inside of that variable. To do that, type anim equals get component, just like the rigid body up above, but in the angle brackets we are going to type animator, and then opening and closing parentheses and a semicolon. Now we want to create if statements that tell when we are moving and when we are not. We're going to do that in our fixed update function right underneath where we actually affect our rigid body's velocity. This line, rb.velocity equals new vector 2, and then in these parentheses, move input times speed, and rb.velocity.y. Right under there, we are going to start typing an if statement. So start with if. In those parentheses, we are going to type move input equals 0. So this is going to be if we are not moving. Then open up those squiggly brackets and move them down. The reason why we know that we are not moving is because a move input will either return a -1, a 1, or a 0. A -1 means that we are pressing the left arrow key. A +1 means we are pressing the right arrow key, and a 0 means we are not receiving any input. So that means we can't be moving. If that's the case, inside of there we will type anim dot set bool. This is a function that is going to allow us to grab a bool from our animator, the parameter that we created, specifically the moving parameter, and we are going to change its value. The first thing we want to type is the string value of the name of that parameter. So let's go back to our project. Moving is what we named it. Moving with a capital M. So that's the way we're going to type it in our script. I'm going to type capital M O-V-I-N-G, moving. And then it's looking for one more parameter, that is what value we want to change that bool to. And in this case, we want it to be false, because if our move input is 0, then we are not moving. So we should not be playing the moving animation. Right after that if statement, go ahead and type else. We don't need to type a condition this time, we just need to open up this block with some squiggly brackets and press enter to move it down. This else block is going to cover any other condition besides if move input equals 0. So basically, if move input equals 0, that means we're not moving. Else must mean that we are moving then. So I'm going to type pretty much the same line as before. Anim dot set bool, and then in parentheses, and then in quotation marks, moving, and then after that a set of quotation marks. After that string, we're going to type true instead of false like before, because now we are moving and we want to make sure that we have our moving animation playing. Now I'm going to save my script and go back to my Unity project, and let's test it out. Now we should have a running animation and an idle animation that work. The only thing we'll need is our jumping animation. Let's press play. Very good. Now we're going to import our jump sprite sheet. let's right click, make sure that you are in your Sprite Sheets folder in your project window. Right click, import new asset. Just like before, we're just finding our sprite sheet. Then I am going to change the sprite mode to multiple, from single to multiple. Apply that change by pressing the apply button at the bottom right. And then click Sprite Editor to open up your sprite editor. And now we're going to be able to cut our frames, our individual frames, to use for our animation. Click the top left slice menu. You want to make sure that your type is automatic, but we are going to change our pivot point from whatever it is to custom. And then the custom pivot point is going to have an X value of 0.3 and a Y value of 0.05. Let's press slice. And now the last thing we're going to do to adjust our sprite sheet is we're going to make sure that this middle frame where we're jumping in midair has the same dimensions as the rest of them. So at the bottom of it, even if it's empty space, we have the bottom of that sprite. What I mean is we're going to click on the sprite before. We're going to grab its Y value position. We are going to plug that in to this cut. So Y value of 5, it's going to move our sprite cut down here. Then we're going to change the height as well so that it covers the entire sprite. So we're going to change our height to 830. There we go. Now let's press apply at the top right. Exit out of your sprite editor and go to your animation window. Now click on your player game object. We are going to add a new animation by clicking this drop down arrow and pressing create new clip. We are going to name this animation jump, but please recognize that this is going to be one of 3 different animations for the jump cycle. Jump is going to be the first one where we actually jump off of the ground. There's going to be a mid-air animation in the middle for when we are just not touching the ground and we have not landed yet. And we're going to have a third animation for landing. Let's press save. Now press the red record button and we are going to modify the very first frame by changing the sprite in our sprite renderer. I'm going to go to sprite sheet and drag the first sprite of my jump sprite sheet to the sprite slot. Then I will move to frame 5. And like before, I'm just going to keep going. So now we've got our beginning jump animation. Now let's create a new animation. Create new clip. I'm going to call this mid-air. I'm going to press the red record button and I am going to add the mid-air sprite frame right here to our sprite renderer. That's the only frame that's going to be in our mid-air animation. I'm going to press the record button to make sure I'm not editing that anymore. Now let's create a last animation by pressing create new clip. And I'm going to name this land. Now I'm going to press the red record button and I am going to first start with the mid-air frame. I'm going to move by 5 and I'm going to just start finishing the animation. It should be like 3 frames left. All the way back to the neutral position. In this case, I'm not going to use this frame, I'm going to delete it because it got a little bit cut off. I'm going to use the very first one. Alright. We also want to make sure to add two properties, Box Collider 2D, the size, and the offset. Now let's save our scene and go back to our animator. I'm going to drag my jump animation over here along with its midair and land animations. Now let's create a transition going from idle to the jumping animation. We will right click on idle, make transition, jump. We are also going to want to create a transition going from run to jump. Right click on run, make transition, and connect that to jump. Then we are going to want to create a transition by right clicking on jump, make transition, connect that to midair, and then right click on midair, make transition, and go to land. From land, we are going to want to create another transition by right clicking, make transition, and connect it back to idle. Right click, make transition, and connect it back to run. So now no matter what, we have the ability to go back to where we need to. First, we are going to start by our transitions going to the jump animation. Let's create a new parameter. It's going to be a trigger, and it's going to be called jump. Now let's create a bool, and it's going to be called landed. Next, you are going to want to take your idle animation transition to the jump. We are going to deselect has exit time, and then add a condition by pressing the plus button. And we're going to make it so that the jump trigger has to be triggered. Do the same with the run animation going to the jump animation. Deselect has exit time, and then press the plus button under conditions. Where it says moving by default, go ahead and select jump. Now, no matter whether we are running or we are sitting in our idle position, we will be able to jump. This transition, going from jump to midair, is just going to have an exit time. So we are not going to deselect this box. We are going to leave it alone, and it's not going to have any more conditions. This is going to be the natural progression of this animation. It's this transition from midair to land that we are going to worry about now. Under conditions, I'm going to press the plus button and select landed and keep this value as true. Then I'm going to make sure to deselect has exit time. And finally, we are just going to make sure that these two transitions are determined by the moving bool. So if we are moving, let's start with the transition from landing animation to the running animation. For once, we actually do need this land animation to do its entire animation before we can move on. So don't deselect has exit time, but under conditions, press the plus button, and moving has to be equal to true. And click on the transition going from land to idle. Again, keep has exit time checked. Press the plus button in your list of conditions, but this time moving has to be equal to false. Now that we have our animator all set up, let's go back to our script. Down in the update, where we find the input of the user pressing the up or W key, we are going to put the trigger for jumping in here. I'm going to type anim.set trigger, and then parentheses. Inside of those, we need to type the string that we named our trigger. In this case, it is jump with a capital J. And I am going to copy that line and paste it down in the else if statement below as well. The next thing I want to do is I want to go down here to if is grounded equals true. We are going to want to land, so I'm going to type anim.set bool, and then in quotation marks, we are going to type landed, and that's going to be set to true. Let's save our script, and let's test our scene out. I know that it looks a little bit weird. That's because we need to double click on this jump animation, and we need to make sure that it is not looping. In fact, we also need to do that for our land animation. So double click on jump and the land animation and deselect loop time. Let's save and play again.